Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered take straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, and that is the entirety of the latest instalment of the Arctangent festival that's held in the UK in Bristol, on a farm on a lovely field where it rains all the time and is always wonderful. So, for those who don't know what Arctangent is, basically it's a really small UK festival that's been going for, I think this was like its 9th year, so coming on to 10 years, and I've been to all of them. I think the first one was basically, I went on a whim essentially. One of my friends invited me because they knew like a decent amount of lineup. I knew almost no one, honestly, but there was a good group of people going, so it seemed like a good opportunity to try out something a little, outside my wheelhouse, and that first festival, I got to say, is still something that I remember, like, incredibly fondly, and it represented, like, a slight paradigm shift for me when it comes to not only music, but festivals in general, because before this point, I'd only really tried really big major festivals like Reading and Download. There were Sonosphere as well. I think there were a couple others I can't remember the names of, but this was the first, like, small festival I went to, and I'm pretty sure that in this first year, attendance was like less than 2,000 people. Like, it was a very, very small festival indeed. And it only ran like 2 days of music with 2 silent discos, and there were, limited number of stages and bands playing each day and whatnot. But it was still a fantastic time. I really enjoyed the fact that you didn't have to walk a million miles to get to each individual stage, which is like something I was very used to at the time. Also, I really liked the fact that the food vendors seemed like they'd been, hand-picked to some extent, and a lot of the food was actually really, really good and not as overpriced as with other festivals. And of course, then there's the music. Before this point, I really didn't know much about post-rock or math rock or weirder forms of rock in general. I was like vaguely aware of maybe a couple acts. I think like I knew Rollo Tomasi, who played, because I was really into the more extreme heavy stuff. And I also knew Antarwitch from afar because I'd seen them at Reading that same year and really enjoyed them, and moved on to their records like since then basically. So in fact, actually no, I think Reading runs after, so I must have seen Antarwitch from afar after and was a fan before that point. Either that or I discovered them as festival. I can't remember exactly, but either way, I was aware of a couple of the bands. But basically, there's a lot of bands I remember from this first year that I discovered for the first time. So like Physics House Band was the really big standout set for me, like the really big standout discovery. I thought they were incredibly tight, really creative, ultra psychedelic, lots of stuff to enjoy. So that was really cool. I'm struggling to remember other artists I saw, but I definitely, I think a lot of the kind of almost cliche, post-rock and math rock bands that are sort of big in the third wave played it. So like you had, 65 Days of Static, I'm pretty sure played, Fuck Buttons played. Really enjoyed both their sets. I want to say, not 100% sure on this, but I want to say like Talons, Tall Ships, Maybe She Will, those types of bands all played, and I think I quite enjoyed a lot of their sets too. So yeah, this festival is something that's really, really, important to me. I've been going since day one. I think it's incredibly well run for the most part. The lineups are always killer. I'm glad that they've actually expanded it recently in terms of genres, because it was a pretty limited pool they were drawing from before, and I think they even had like a fair few repeated sets. Plus, they also hit the peak of what you can do in those genres pretty early on. Like, I want to say on the 3rd or 4th year they had like Dillinger and Death Heaven playing, and like on the 6th or 7th they had Godspeed You Black Emperor play. They've had Mono play. I think the only real like big post-rock bands they haven't had play would be like maybe Sigur Rós and Mogwai, but Sigur Rós are probably maybe even a bit too big to play it, honestly. But who knows, hopefully in the future I guess we'll see that. But either way, in recent years the festival's taken a bit more of a metal-y approach to things. Like the year that ran before COVID was, oh god, I'm trying to remember the headliners now, I actually can't remember. I know it was like, I think it was mostly metal bands from what I remember, I just can't remember who. Oh good, it might have been the Glassjaw year, which I guess aren't really a metal band, but there was definitely like more on the lineup, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to get at. One of the things that's always been interesting is that as they've kind of moved on, I feel like they've ventured slightly into Tech Fest's bookings. But either way, after 3 years, even though the last one was maybe a bit too metal-y for my taste, I still really, really had a good time, as always. And after 3 years, you obviously end up missing a lot of the things you used to enjoy, especially being trapped indoors and not being able to even go to gigs for a decent amount of time. It really, it really made me yearn for the festival season. And I actually, funnily enough, I just got back from Boomtown before attending this one. So, I think I got back from Boomtown on the Monday, and I left Wednesday at, 7 a.m. with a group of people. to go get food in a cafe and then drive. So like my legs had barely recovered when we kind of like start this festival. And basically what I'm going to do in this podcast is just go through every single act I saw, which is going to be one hell of a lot, because so one of the things I've always wanted to do at Arctangent is the way they run the lineup is everything's staggered. So there's no like weird clashes where you can only catch like half of one set and then you're running to catch like the final third of another or anything like that. It's 2 bands clash, then another 2 bands clash, then another 2 bands clash, and it just goes like that in like half-hour chunks, more or less. So if you want, you can try and catch a band in every slot. It's pretty suicidal because you're not going to have any breaks for like 12 hours, but I've wanted to do it for ages, and this was the year. After a 3-year break, I was like, I'm going to do this. And stunningly enough, despite the fact my legs were destroyed from Boomtown, the world's hilliest festival, I actually managed to more or less achieve this. I think I missed maybe like 4 or 5 slots total, but I caught at least like 1 or 2 songs of every other slot. So I was like incredibly happy with that. But essentially our story starts on the Wednesday. So I think this is the first year they've done it. They were going to do it for 2020, but obviously that got cancelled and pushed back. So I think this is the first year they've done the extra day. So normally the festival runs from Thursday through to Sunday, with music on Thursday, Friday and Saturday. But this year, they expanded Thursday to be a full day, so it starts from 11 a.m, it's got a big headliner as opposed to being a small day. And the small day was shifted to Wednesday, which was just one stage, all local Bristol bands. That's when I arrived, essentially. I wanted to make sure I got there for the very first band, and we actually just about managed it. It came real close, that's for sure. But fortunately, the way everything's like organised and laid out makes it quite streamlined, especially this year. They actually changed the festival site this year. Before, it was kind of, you had the main stage like the bottom of a hill, and there was this weird like gate separating both halves of the arena, and because you had to come through one area, that particular area got a lot of foot traffic, so if it rained it always turned into this horrible just sludge you had to like get through. So I was really glad. And also, actually, that's another point, because the main stage was at the bottom of a hill, if it rained, the main stage kind of turned into a giant pit of soup as well. So for rain purposes, this seems like a very good change. Moving it to a more flat surface was definitely a positive, but it was also a little bit more cramped than normal. So unfortunately, there was a bit more sound bleed between certain stages, but I'll get into that a bit later. That was one of the kind of downsides. But overall, I would say the new site was probably better, to be honest, in a lot of ways. Like I said, a large part of the reason would just be it was flat. We didn't get any rain this year, fortunately, but it definitely would have helped with that. And also the other thing is it meant that running up and down a hill to catch bands just wasn't a thing, so it was a lot less tiring as well. So that was a pretty big thing too. But hey, let's get to the lineup. So on the Wednesday, basically the only stage that was open was called the Elephant in the Bar Room, which was primarily a bar, but it had a stage set up and there was also merch at the back. So it was kind of like a nice little hangout spot. Over the weekend, a lot of quieter or like more subtle artists played this stage. Lots of electronic stuff on here too, like maybe some more ambient, other like math rocky type bands. There was a lot of like singer-songwriter type stuff here too. But on the Wednesday, it was more or less just a regular stage for all intents and purposes. And the first band that played was Lightning Sharks. So I only caught a tiny bit of their set, and I thought they were like completely okay. They're like a pretty rowdy mathcore, I guess you could say, band. Lots of like heavily distorted riffs, lots of like off-kilter rhythms and that kind of thing. I thought they were like completely fine. Didn't blow me away or anything, so I'll just kind of go past them. Then the next band, I checked out most of the lineup beforehand, and the next band up was My Octopus Mind, and I didn't really enjoy these guys on record that much. They were kind of a sort of psychedelic-y garage rock sort of band, I suppose you could say. But something about the way it was recorded and presented just didn't really do much for me, and I thought live they were a lot better, honestly. Everything felt more tight, more punchy. I think the reason I didn't like them on record is probably down to the recording, if I'm being honest. That seems to be like the main sticking point. So I thought they were a lot better than I was expecting. Still nothing like mind-blowing or anything, but like a solid little band. The next band was called The Road. Again, I checked these guys beforehand. They seemed like a very slow, sludgy, kind of doom metal-y band. The recording seemed okay, but I was very curious to see how it carried across live. And I gotta be honest, I really bounced off these guys live. They ended up being a two-piece, so it was a drummer and a guitarist, but everything felt almost a little bit too stripped back for me, especially for the genre. Like, when I listen to this type of stuff, I want it to be quite overwhelming and powerful, and it just, I don't know, it felt a little flat to me, unfortunately. It wasn't quite as impactful as I was hoping. So yeah, I don't really have much to say on the road. I kind of left fairly soon, so we'll just move on. Next up was Alanza, and honest to God, I'm trying to remember if I even saw these guys. I think this might have been one of the slots I missed. So, I go, yeah, we'll just move on, that's fine. The next band up, now this one was probably the first artist that really kind of like grabbed my attention. So they are called Mutant Thoughts, and they were the first band that kind of like turned the festival around a bit, because essentially what happened is we'd got there in a bit of a rush. Like I said, we got there just in time to catch lightning sharks, but we had to like throw up our tents and then like deal with some of the problems that you always run into when you first arrive at a festival, sort out wristbands, and it was a bit of a panicked rush. Then when you get on site, you realise everything's different. They'd a lot of the arena was kind of like closed off as well, so on first look it seemed like, oh no, this is a bit scaled back, I don't know how this year's gonna be, but because it's a festival about the bands and about the music, the first good artist you see immediately changes all that around, and Mutant Thoughts were kind of that for me. So Mutant Thoughts are essentially like a three-piece, really, really electronic focused, almost like prog type band. They're really hard to describe and really quite bizarre. I've checked them out since coming back, and I really, really like a lot of the most recent singles they have out. I think they have an album that's fairly old at this point, and I wasn't quite as into that, but the recent singles are really cool, and live, although were just incredibly tight, had a ton of like really cool like bass-driven grooves, because there were no guitars, it was just like keyboards, dual vocals, drummer, and bass. So yeah, really unique sound. Really, really interesting band. I'm super curious to see, what their next album's going to sound like. I think I'll be very into it based off the singles I've heard. So yeah, just honestly, really surprising set. Did not manage to check them out before the festival. They're one of the few bands I didn't get a chance to check out. And yeah, I just ended up really enjoying the set. The next band up was Modern Rituals. So these guys are a band I'm kind of vaguely aware of, because I play in a band myself, and actually we recorded two of our latest singles through Tom Hill, who's the guitarist of Modern Rituals, and he's a absolutely fucking awesome dude. He did a cracking job with the recordings, so I had to go see his band. It's kind of a necessary thing to do, right? And yeah, I thought they were like decent, not massively my cup of tea. They're quite hard to describe. I think there's a lot of alt-rock in there. There's a decent amount of like post-hardcore, and it's very well put together. They're a very tight band. I think that's something that very much stood out to me. But the sound for me personally was just a little bit like middle of the road, I guess. I know a lot of people that are actually super into them, and a lot of the people that I went to the festival with actually ended up really enjoying them, but it wasn't massively my cup of tea. I just sort of thought it was okay. But regardless, like, very, very tight live band, which was cool to see, and also not too surprising knowing Tom and how committed he is to everything he does. Although, to be fair, I think you could say that for a lot of the artists playing this festival, but hey. The next artist that played was Luo. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Luo. So I've seen these guys before quite a while ago. I think I saw them at Portals Festival, and they're essentially a two-piece. One dude doing like electronics, keys, and occasionally guitar, stuff like that, and then the other dude on drums. And they remind me a lot of Free Trap Tigers. They kind of hit on that same like electronic focused post rock with some math rock influence in there. But the difference is these guys are significantly closer to the dancier side of the spectrum, the slightly more electronic EDM sort of style, I guess. And they've improved a lot is the main takeaway I had from the set. They were significantly tighter than when I saw them. The songs felt like just much more layered and interesting. And Jesus fucking Christ, their drummer's so goddamn good. It's actually borderline unbelievable. Like, he put on one of the most impressive drum performances I think I saw all weekend. There were a lot of incredible drummers at this festival, like every year without fail. So yeah, Luau was just almost like a stunningly good set. It was one of the issues that we had with the stage, actually, and one that would unfortunately persist for most of the weekend, is this stage just isn't that loud, and I felt like everything needed to be cranked up a little bit. Luau suffered from this a touch, unfortunately, because what they do is so kind of like, there's so much detail in the layers, and a lot of those layers and, a lot of the instrumentation is actually quite like low in the mix, so you need fairly loud speakers to be able to hear everything as clearly as possible. So it was a bit unfortunate they were a bit quiet, but even still, like, they smashed it. It was a fucking awesome set. They said they played a bunch of their heavier stuff, which definitely came across. So yeah, no complaints. Honestly, absolute banger. One of the best sets of the festival for sure. Really, really enjoyed it. If you don't know who they are, definitely give them a shout if you're into any kind of like dancey shit, or if you're into like the more electronic side of the post-rock and math rock scene. I can't recommend them highly enough. They're an incredible band. The next band were called Mother Vulture. Now, I wasn't aware of these guys beforehand. They're one of the bands that I couldn't really find much on. And even since coming back, I can't find a ton on them, honestly. I've found a couple singles, but that's really about it. But essentially, they're just like a loud rock, just like a loud rock like group. They have like a bunch of bangers, very traditional setup. There's no screaming, it's like all singing. There's elements of like post-hardcore in there. They kind of remind me at times a little bit of bands like I would say like almost At the Drive-In or Refused, almost like traditional post-hardcore, I guess. But there's definitely more of a rock flair to it, more of a kind of like over-the-top theatrical showmanship. Like, at one point the guitarist ended up leaving the stage and running across the bar that was like to the side of the venue. They had a ton of energy. It was a really great performance. They were incredibly tight. I only watched it really from the back, so I was eating a burrito at this point. Which was kind of unfortunate because I did want to catch more of it, but I think I was waiting on the burrito place to get its rice cooked. But regardless, fucking tight band. Really, really enjoyed what I heard and what I saw of the set. I'll definitely be checking them out in the future. The next band up is Memory of Elephants. Now, these guys are a pretty straightforward math rock band that I've just never understood, honestly. Like, I've seen them before. I've listened to them on record. They do absolutely nothing for me. They're tight. They're very good musicians, clearly. But it's just really not for me. Checked out a couple songs and pretty much confirmed that belief, honestly. The next band up is Sugar Horse. So these guys released an album called The Long Live After. I think I'm pronouncing that right anyway, or remembering that correctly, I guess I should say. And that record is really fucking good. It's a really interesting mix of sludge metal and shoegaze, essentially. It's got some more kind of like ethereal post-rock elements to it, but largely those are the two genres they're dabbling in. And again, unfortunately, for this style, I think what you need is like a decent amount of volume. So the fact that it was a bit quiet did end up killing a couple parts of the set. However, they were still very, very good. They performed incredibly tight. I think a lot of the audience was clearly like into them and ready for it because it seemed like a lot of people were captivated by the set, and I definitely enjoyed it, even if it was a touch on the quiet side. So no like massive complaints, I guess. The only major one this is really unfortunate. They have a song. I think it's the title track, actually. I think it's literally the song called The Long Live After. And it has a huge portion that is incredibly quiet. Like, it's just cleanly sung vocals, very delicate guitars. And I don't even know if it has any drums on it, honestly. It's just a very quiet section of the song. And it was so quiet coming out the speakers that you could hear the people at the very back of the tent. Even if I was like, I was in the like front third of the audience, I'd say. And you could hear people at the very, very back of the merch tent buying shit. Like, you could hear all of the chatter, and it was just really, really unfortunate because that's it's a very cool, very beautiful moment in the set, and it's unfortunate that was kind of the situation we found ourselves in. But hey, that's fine. Still, they put on a great show. They were very good. I enjoyed the Sugar Horse set a decent amount. Then the Wednesday headliners were the St. Pierre Snake Invasion. I've seen these guys a lot. And I don't think I've ever seen them be even close to as good as they were on this Wednesday. The audience was 100% behind them. Loads of people knew a ton of the words. The energy that they just exerted from stage, it was 100% like, we are so goddamn happy to be back and playing this stage. That was just the energy I got. They sounded tighter than normal. The set list was great. It was a great mix of like some of the really old stuff and the newer stuff, which for the record, all their stuff is like pretty good. But I think my favorite stuff is the first album. The second album lost me a little bit, at a couple moments. So I'm glad they didn't like rely too heavily on like tons of new material, although they did play a lot of the songs from the newer album that I actually really like, so I thought it felt like the set list was very well picked. But yeah, there was a ton of material from all the different eras of the band. So yeah, just a stellar job. I don't really know what to say. They were tighter than I've ever seen them before. The frontman's got one hell of a personality to him, and it works super well with the crowd he had. Yeah, it was just a really great show. Definitely a great one to like cap off the evening, really. So that was all of Wednesday, the taster day. And by the end of this day, I was already pretty shattered, to be honest, and so was everybody else in my gang. We went and checked out the Silent Disco for a bit. I think it was running till 1:30 on this day. Normally it goes till 3. But we ended up leaving at like 12:30, something like that. We sort of hung around for like an hour, enjoyed some of the bangers, and then dipped. One thing that was interesting, though, one thing I will comment on, is that the Silent Disco has always been like a shockingly big draw for Arctangent, because the music here on it is like a really bizarre mix of different styles. And that was definitely the case for the first like 4 or 5 years it ran. But there was a point like after that where it started to waver a bit, and it felt like it was just going for too generic a like rock club kind of vibe, which was unfortunate because I always thought the cool thing about the Arctangent disco was the blending of different genres. So like you'd hear like Slipknot and Refused and McCluskey, but you'd also get like Beyonce and Justin Timberlake and like lots of poppy stuff like that, and occasionally like electronic stuff too. It was a really really good blend of just different sounds that represented to some extent the eclectic taste of the people that were there. And that was kind of something that was lacking in the last like maybe 3 or 4 years. I think maybe slightly because the festival had become more metal-y, so they went for that more traditional like rock club aesthetic, I guess. But I'm unbelievably over the moon about the fact that that's not the case anymore, and it's back to the good old days. In fact, actually, honestly, if anything, it's maybe improved since the good old days. The mix is back. You had a ton of like, those kind of classic rock bangers you'd expect. You had a ton of the kind of like ultra cheesy pop stuff you'd expect. And then out of fucking nowhere, they just had like, oh yeah, we're going to do 45 minutes of drum and bass and jungle. And after coming back from Boomtown, I felt like I'd brought a piece of it with me. It was one of the most bizarre, trippy experiences I've had in a while. But yeah, there were like 4 or 5 jungle tunes that I was just dancing my ass off by the end of the night before we decided to call it. So that was one hell of a pleasant surprise, and definitely was, I was hoping it would be a sign of things to come. Spoiler alert, it kind of was, but I'll get into that later. But anyway, after Wednesday, I woke up at a disgustingly early time and was ready to check out more bands. And the first band I checked out was Traps. These guys are kind of hard to describe, honestly. They're like a heavy band. They draw from like bits of post-hardcore, bits of alt-rock. There's maybe like a touch of like math rock in there as well, and alt rock too. They're kind of they've got an odd sound for sure, and they've got songs that span across a bunch of different genres. The thing that shocks me though is most of their songs are actually quite long, which for a band as like heavy and intense as they are, you really wouldn't expect. But a decent chunk of their songs are like 7 or 8 minutes. In fact, I'm pretty sure in their half-hour slot they only performed like 3 or 4 songs. It was kind of bizarre, but yeah, they were solid. Decent amount of energy, played tight. The frontman for the band was kind of talking about the band in general, and I see him around a lot. I think he's the same guy who plays bass in Ohm, so I think he's in a decent like number of bands. He also runs like a small record label too, so he's very very much within the music scene. He was talking about how he made Traps because he wanted he wanted a band where there would be enough members that he wouldn't have to like put a ton of effort into this one specifically, and then everybody ended up leaving, and now it's basically just a 2-piece with a bunch of session musicians, so he does everything for this as well, which I just found kind of funny. But they were really good. I honestly thought I had a really really good time with them. It was probably a bit early in the morning for something quite as intense as that, but it was still like a solid show. I enjoyed it. Good way to kick off Thursday. And then the next artist I intended to see was I don't know how you pronounce it. I heard her pronounce it, and I still have no idea. She's called Quarriq. That's Qariaq, and she's essentially like a singer-songwriter type person. Plays like acoustic guitar. Has a bunch of like looping pedals and all that good stuff. But she was like 15 minutes late. I don't know what happened exactly. She mentioned in her set that her drum machine broke, so I wonder if it was something related to that. I'm honestly not too sure. But regardless, for those 15 minutes, I was like, well, fuck it. She's clearly not coming out. I'm going to have a little wonder. And this is when I realised, oh no, there could be some issues with this festival, because it seems like everything is running fucking late. I wandered over to the Bixler stage to see Fez, who are a very like pop-focused math rock band in a similar vein to Orchards. And I caught like a bit of their set, and I was like, they're decent. They're not incredible in my opinion. I'm sure they'll improve in the future. I know a lot of people that really like them, so they've got like a decent amount of buzz behind them, it seems. But I just thought they were okay. And then the thing that shocked me though was I wandered over to the main stage because I heard something coming from it, and I was like, no one should be on main stage right now. That slot is done. Whoever was on main stage at this point is who was clashing with Traps, who had already finished like 15 minutes ago. And lo and behold, there was still the first band playing on main stage. They're called Bonocons of Doom. They're like a very sludgy kind of like doom metal-y type band. Very heavy slow music. And that was a little worrying, honestly, because seeing a stage be like 15 minutes delayed is kind of insane. And this was the first moment where I realised maybe the stages are a little bit too close together this year, because if you were outside the main stage, you could hear Fez from the Bixler and Bonocons almost at like an equal level. So I imagine the people that weren't quite like inside the tent but were like solidly watching one set could hear the other one as well. And for some of the quieter acts over the weekend, like, that seemed like a pretty worrying prospect. But regardless, eventually I ended up wandering back over to Elephant in the Room to see Quarik, and I thought she was actually fantastic. So what ended up happening is basically her drum machine, like I said, had broken, and she had to get a drummer from another band. She ended up getting the drummer from Memory of Elephants to come on and play with her. And I gotta say, I've never seen her with a drum machine. I thought it worked incredibly well with a live drummer. I thought it added a ton to the set. She was great at like kind of manipulating the various guitar loops and that kind of thing. She had a great voice. She was just a very, very... Like, she had a very calming stage presence, which was something that I thought was, like, almost needed over the weekend, because there were so many heavy bands playing this time. It was nice to see something just, like, sort of chilled out and calm in the morning. So I thought she was absolutely captivating, just, like, a really, really fantastic set. Really, really enjoyed it. The next band I saw was at the main stage, so this is where everything was delayed, but fortunately, these guys actually did make it on time, so it wasn't, like, horrifically delayed. And the band I saw was called Pine, that's Pijn, and they're essentially, I've seen them before, they're a post-rock / post-metal band. They kind of remind me quite a lot of Godspeed, to be honest. They definitely draw a lot from that playbook, it feels like. It just, in some of the melodies they play, there's a lot of like overlap with almost like Alleluia era Godspeed. But they thought they were really good, really tight band. Nothing like mind-blowing or anything. Definitely kind of a good early morning set, but it felt nice to see a very traditional kind of like Arctangent band, essentially, is what I would say it boils down to. So yeah, really enjoyed that set. And then the next set was... Oh, I'm trying to remember. Who did I see? So it was Vasa, Skin Failure, and Schema were all clashing. I think I wanted to see Schema, but they ended up pulling out last minute and someone else was replacing them. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Seams, who I weren't that interested in. I definitely didn't see Skin Failure. I might have like popped into Vasa, but honestly I barely remember anything from it, so I don't think it's worth... Pardon me. I don't think it's worth mentioning. And that's fine anyway, because the next band I saw was June, so that's spelled DVUNU. And these guys are like a slightly progressive, very much a like sludge metal band. And I've got to say, honestly, I'd listened to them before, and I thought they were decent. Not incredible, but decent. After seeing this set, I totally get the hype, and I actually think they're an incredible band, and they're probably going to keep growing in size dramatically. I felt like I saw a lot of their shirts over the weekend, and that's completely justified because they were just unbelievably tight. One of the things that really struck me with these guys as well is like it wasn't like overly heavy or overbearing. They weren't going for like that type of sludge. It wasn't trying to be oppressive. Like I said, there is that like prog infused into it. It reminded me almost a bit more of like a Mastodon, where it's a tiny bit more colourful than that. There's a bit more going on. But the thing that fucking blew me away is the dude's clean vocals live are absolutely stunning. He more or less nails every part of the singing across the entire set. Like, it was genuinely... I was taken aback, for sure. I was not expecting him to be that good, especially considering there really isn't that much singing in their music. It's a lot of harsh vocals, for sure. I mean, there's a decent amount, to be fair. I'm probably underselling it slightly. But it's definitely not like, you know, it's not all clean vocals or anything like that. So the fact his harsh vocals were, like, bang on and his cleans were, like, so incredible really, really shocked me. And I was, again, just very captivated the entire set. Definitely going to be checking out a lot more of their stuff from the future. Definitely keeping an eye on them in general. The next slot, I think I watched a bit of Bicurious, but it didn't really do much for me. So I just kind of pieced out. They're like just like a fun, peppy math rock band, I guess, with some more like rocky kind of influences, more straightforward than like, I don't know, some of the more insane some of the more insane math rock you see. So yeah, didn't really do much for me. It was okay. But next up was A.A. Williams on the main stage. So for those who don't know, she's a kind of a singer-songwriter with a bit of a like gothy aesthetic, with bits of like post-rock in there. But generally it's just kind of like relatively stripped back guitar and singing. She's been around for a while, especially in this scene, and she's been growing an audience slowly over time, and I can completely understand why. She's a very fucking good artist. If you're into I would say if you're into like Emma Ruth Rundle or maybe even a little bit Chelsea Wolfe, then I would say give A.A. Williams a shot because she deserves your attention. She's just very good at what she does. She had the entire main stage, like everyone in that crowd was dead silent, like absolutely captivated by the performance. And it wasn't hard to see why. I think the aesthetic they went for with everyone dressed in black, I think the drummer and the guitarist were like in, black suits. She had kind of this really cool fit going on as well. So yeah, it was just very, very good aesthetically. They were incredibly tight. It was one of the times also where so one thing that's interesting is the sound was a little bit all over the place the weekend. Like some sets sounded incredible and others sounded like really bad. And A.A. Williams fortunately sounded fucking awesome. So it was one of the better times I've seen her, I've got to say. I've seen her a decent number of times at this point, but this was definitely one of the strongest sets. I thought she was absolutely excellent. Then after that, the next band I saw was O Gives Big Band. So these are one of those bands that, like I said, I checked out everyone in the slot. So it's Puppy, O Gives Big Band, and Cold Bones. Checked out everyone in the slot beforehand, and I thought all the bands sounded decent, but O Gives definitely stuck out a bit more. They seemed a little unusual, I think it's fair to say. There was a lot of math rock in their sound, but at the same time, it felt shockingly aggressive. Like there was a lot of harsh vocals, and there was almost a bit of like mathcore in there as well. All stuff that definitely appeals to me, so I was very curious to go catch them. And I've got to say, when I listened to them beforehand, I thought they were good. When I saw them live, I thought they were fucking great. Incredibly tight, incredibly punchy performance. It solidly left an impact. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It was just a very direct, a very interesting set with sounds that kind of came out of left field a little bit, considering what I was expecting from them. It definitely came across a lot more aggressive live than it did on record, but I think that was kind of a bit of a theme over the weekend at this stage specifically. I don't know why, but Bixler sounded blown out the entire time. In a way, it worked for like a lot of the bands, because a lot of heavy bands ended up playing this stage. So yeah, O Gives were really cool. Definitely another one I'm keeping an eye out on in the future. So the next slot is probably going to upset some people, but it was Delta Sleep and Cryptic Shift. I've never been a big fan of Delta Sleep. I just don't really get it. I don't really know what else to say. I have no defense for myself. I have no way to, exonerate this opinion, but I just don't really get it. But the other band was Cryptic Shift, who were like a progressive-y tech death band, who I wasn't super into either. They seem like the kind of thing I might enjoy on record, so I'm going to give them another shot, but I'm not expecting huge things necessarily. So in the end, I did check out Delta Sleep. And yeah, I pretty much just bounced off them immediately. I stuck around for like 2 or 3 songs. I was just like, this is solidly not for me. I don't know what it is. Like, I can tell they're a good band. They've got like a decent audience as well. I know that some of their albums are quite ambitious in terms of like the storytelling and that kind of thing. So I have a huge amount of respect for them, but something about them just doesn't quite click with me. I don't know whether it's the slightly more, I don't know, emo vibes, I guess. In the vocals, maybe I just find them slightly grating. That's like a part of it, but there's a lot of artists I listen to that are like that, so it's hard to say. The math rock side of their sound is kind of, I don't know, I've always found it a little bit, I don't know, underwhelming is maybe the right word, I think. Yeah, I don't know. They're not a band that have ever really captivated me. They've got a couple tunes I like. I think Twin Galaxies is a decent record, but nothing like incredible, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I gave them another fair shot. Kind of bounced off them again. Went and checked out a tiny bit of Cryptic Shift, and they were in the middle of some horrible noise, just like really wild feedbacky stuff. And I was like, oh, pardon me. I was like, you know what? I could use a break right now, so I think I'm just going to go do that instead. So I chilled out and waited for the next set, which is one of the sets I was most excited for all weekend, and that was Imperial Triumphant. And holy fucking shit, Imperial Triumphant were like legitimately incredible. Like one of the best sets I saw all weekend for sure. This was another case of, at the start of the set, a decent number of people actually started leaving because, I think, partially because the sound was very muddy when they started. Fortunately, that didn't last for too long. But generally, Imperial Triumphant are this incredibly dissonant death metal band that have, like, avant-garde jazz, like, blended into everything they do. Like, all of the, like the drummer plays in an incredibly like jazzy way. A lot of the notes they play are tinged with like jazz keys and stuff like that. They've got a really, really unique, very cool sound. Despite that, they are still incredibly just heavy and discordant and just kind of horrible, honestly, in a lot of ways. But there are a couple of things about their set that I really didn't expect. So I knew they wear masks when they come out, but what they actually did with that was significantly more than just like a gimmick, which I was very, very happy to see. Because a lot of the times when bands do these kind of like really over-the-top theatrical like things, especially when bands as technical as this and interesting as this do it, it can often detract from the music. But this has got to be one of the only times I've seen it where it actually massively it massively improves both sides of the band. The way that it worked is essentially each of them had their own little like personality to some extent, their own like unique mask, and they never at any point said anything to the audience with words. It was all just like gestures and, you know, kind of like theatrics via body movement, that kind of thing, and purely just focusing on playing tight other than that. And holy fucking shit, their drummer is good. I know he's good because I've heard him on record, but it's kind of unbelievable when you see him live. The way he blends the kind of the more jazzy fills and the more jazzy sections with the really intense death metal, just like pure blasting, it is, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. It's incredibly unique. It almost reminds me of like a very, very intense, like extreme jazz and extreme kind of like death metal version of the Mastodon drummer, I guess. That's like the closest comparison I can think of, but I've definitely never ever seen anyone like him live. He was absolutely stunning. And again, that's not to take away from the other two members. They were both fucking killing it in their own respective ways as well. The bass player especially had some like incredible licks throughout the set. But yeah, the thing that really stuck out to me for them, for sure, like I said, was just how it was like as theatrical as it needed to be to add something to the set without it ever detracting. And I think that's the real key takeaway. They just did such a good job of making the crowd eat out the palm of their hands without ever having to say a word to hype people up or anything like that, or ever coming across as cheesy or anything like that. It just worked, honestly, significantly better than I ever thought it would. So yeah, I was kind of blown away. They were incredible. And this kind of starts a string of legitimately incredible sets from this point onwards, which is kind of insane. So Imperial Triumphant, mind-blowing set. I then went to see Perturbator. Perturbator is a synthwave artist. Probably everybody listening to this knows who he is because he's kind of huge. His set was fucking awesome too. It was like the complete opposite of this nasty, discordant like death metal stuff. It was like incredibly dancey, incredibly catchy, like really over the top and bombastic and fun. And his light that he had on stage was super cool too. It was like a giant pentagon with a ton of other lights in the middle with a star like at the top as well. And he used the whole thing with different types of programming to like using different sections of the pentagon and all that kind of stuff to like just put on a stunningly diverse light show that matched the music fucking perfectly. So it was the perfect set to be like slightly drunk at, and that's definitely where I was at this point in the day. So yeah, no criticisms there. It was just a banger of a set. I don't have too much to say about it because there's really not much you can. It was just like a good electronic synthy time. Yeah, really, really fun set. One of the highlights of the weekend as well, for sure. Then after this, there was Alcest, Bosk, and Natalie Evans. So I like all of these artists a decent amount, except for Bosk, honestly. But one of my friends basically said to me, if you haven't seen Bosk, go see him live. And I went and saw Bosk live, and I definitely, after that set, felt like I got it more. So up until now, I assumed Bosk were like a post-metal band, and that was kind of like the primary thing they were trying to do. Like long, oppressive, kind of like epic songs. And after seeing them live, I can solidly say I was just wrong there. There's a shit ton of stoner metal influence in their sound. And they were definitely like loud and punchy, but it still didn't grab me quite as much as I thought it might. So I ended up skipping out on the like back half of the set. Plus at this point, I was fucking shattered. So I definitely needed like a small break. So I ended up watching most of the set. I think I watched like half the set indoors and then came out and sat down outside the tent and watched the rest from there. Seemed like they were definitely tight. They were definitely like quite claustrophobic, which I think is what they're going for. So I can appreciate what they were going for, but it's definitely not my thing. But the next band I saw, this was one hell of a surprise. So Amun-Ra were clashing with Boss Khalid or Khalid. I checked out Boss Khalid and I was like, honestly, they seem like quite a cool band, but I'm gonna go see Amun-Ra. For those who don't know, Amun-Ra are a sludge, or an atmospheric sludge metal band, I guess you could say, with the focus really being on the atmosphere. Everything they've done, in my opinion, is I would almost describe it as like the sonic embodiment of grief. It feels like their music is so oppressively pained and just incredibly like slow and torturous, that it really does create like a unique atmosphere. There isn't really anyone else like Amun-Ra pushing what they do as far as they do. And so I was very curious to see how it would go down live, because they were playing for an hour, and this is definitely one of those cases where I could see myself getting bored halfway through, but I am incredibly pleased to say that absolutely was not the case. So essentially what they are in the end is just a 4 or 5 piece band, and they just play ridiculously slow riffs with a vocalist he's more or less straight out of like a hardcore vocalist playbook in a way, which is very weird. But he just has these incredibly shrill, pained shrieks for like the majority of the set. But what really makes the whole thing work is not only the fact they're incredibly tight, they're a well-oiled machine that have been doing this for ages, it's also the fact that they only use white lights, and they had a projector showing like films accompanying each song, and every single film was in black and white. And for this entire set, it just felt like all of the like joy and fun and happiness had just been sucked out of your body by some kind of like joy demon, and you were just replaced with this desolate, like grief-filled kind of like experience for an hour. It was so unbelievably impactful that I'm honestly a little bit shocked that I hadn't seen them before this point, or hadn't heard of their live show ton before this point. It was only really one of my mates who was like, they're a very good live band, you should go see them. And yeah, I can fully agree with that. They are definitely a truly incredible live band. No one else really liked them doing that kind of thing to the level of extremity they're doing it. And also, seeing them live, also, it just, there was one element of them that I'd never really considered before that really became apparent, and that's, in a lot of their songs, they actually do have a lot of very, very, like, you know, like, whisper quiet moments throughout the set that are actually, like, incredibly beautiful. And it's kind of one of those moments where you realise there's more to it than just, like, the sheer horrifying, oppressive grief, you know? There's almost, like, a beauty in the sadness to some extent. I think that's kind of, like, a large part of their sound now, which is something I never quite clocked onto before. So yeah, Amon-Ra, mind-blowing set. Was not expecting it to be quite as good as it was, and it just fucking was. Then, the next bands that were up was Maybe She Will, McCluskey, and Bolt Ruin. Bolt Ruin, a pretty cool electronic thing, seeming like industrial, very oppressive electronic thing that I would like to check out someday. He seemed really cool. But for me, this was an easy slot to pick, so I'm going McCluskey 100%. They just got fucking bangers for days. And this is where I really noticed that the Bixler stage was on some wild shit. Because, so McCluskey are essentially a noise rock and post-hardcore band, and holy fucking shit were they punchy and distorted and noisy as fuck on this stage. Not to say that as a bad thing, it was actually incredibly positive for most of the bands that played this stage, and McCluskey especially. But the thing is with McCluskey is, every time I see them live, I'm like, I just enjoy Do Dallas. That's the record I know, that's the record I really, really love. I'm probably not going to know the other tunes. And then they play the other tunes, and I'm like, oh my god, I forget how many fucking bangers this band have. Like, even though the other records are definitely weaker in my opinion, there are still some incredible songs on those records, and when they play them live, like, it's impossible not to have a blast. The whole set was just front to back bangers with like very solid banter. I don't know why, but the St. Pierre Snake Invasion frontman is also the bassist now, and he just fits the tone and energy that the band are going for unbelievably well, even though he's not the original bassist. Like, yeah, it's insane. I don't know what to say. They were just mind-blowingly good as well. And then after that, to cap off the day, in the headliner slot, you had Cult of Luna clashing with We Never Learn to Live. I've never been the biggest Cult of Luna fan. I do really enjoy them live. I think they've got a lot of good records, but without a shadow of doubt, I was going to see We Never Learn to Live for this one because I fucking love We Never Learn to Live. Basically everything they've done since the very beginning I think is really, really good. And they've announced this was their final show, which was soul-destroying to me. I think the latest record they put out, Sleepwalk Transmissions, is one of the most underrated, I guess you could say, like, post-hardcore, post-metal, sludge metal records that I could think of. It's one of the most underrated records from my local music scene, period. It's got such a unique atmosphere. They have a real knack for writing just very earwormy melodies. Lyrically, I think they're an incredible band. And, I mean, they came out and they played songs from all over their discography. It was one of the best sets I've seen them do. It was one of the longest sets I've seen them do, so they really got to explore, like, all the different areas. They were incredibly tight. Their frontman's always a joy to watch. Fortunately, it was maybe the only time all weekend that the PX3 stage actually had decent sound. I don't know what was up with that stage. It definitely had the weakest sound all weekend. But for We Never Learn to Live, it was bang on. It sounded incredible. The crowd was like decently behind them. Unfortunately, it felt like, to me, honestly, it's a bit of a shame they're breaking up because it really did feel like a lot of the crowd was there checking them out for the first time. I actually know two people personally who were aware of the band and got into them recently, and they were catching this show as their last show. So that's pretty unfortunate. But hey, what can you do? It was an incredible send-off. I had a brilliant time. Nothing else really to say. If you haven't heard of that band, I highly recommend Sleepwalk Transmissions if you're into the kind of the sounds that I've pinned to them, I guess. So yeah, just an incredible day of music. Honestly, I was saying to one of my friends, or a couple of my friends actually, basically, I think Thursday is maybe the best day of live music I've ever had in my life, because I know I've kind of like brushed over a lot of the smaller acts I saw on that day, but they were still like truly really really good. Like Quarik I thought was fantastic, and she doesn't even come in the top fucking 5 sets of the day. Traps, which opened the day, I thought were really really good as well, and like again just like doesn't even touch the top 5 of the day. The like after Perturbator, it felt like every set I saw was fucking incredible bar Bosk essentially. Honestly, I think every set I saw that entire day, bar a couple that I decided to walk away from in the end, were incredible. So yeah, it was just a truly incredible day of music, and I really felt like Arctangent was back in full force. That was definitely reinforced by the silent disco the later that night as well. Yeah, it was still like just as diverse as ever. One thing that was interesting is there was at least one DJ who was doing like proper mixes between tracks, which was really, really cool. I think that's actually an Arctangent first, and I'm pretty sure that she's going to get more work from the festival, so Silent Disco should be banging for a while. If we have her doing sets from now on, I think it'd be really good. But yeah, I was up way too late. I was up till 3 a.m. I don't really get hangovers, so fortunately on Friday I didn't suffer too much for it. I was just slightly worried about getting up in time, but I managed to do it. And I managed to get my arse out ready for 11 a.m. to catch 5 the Hierophant, which were kind of a very just slow, again, very sludgy, like atmospheric metal band with a lot of like jazz stuff going up on over the top. And when I saw them, I'm pretty sure they were going to play like just a straight 30-minute tune. I only watched half the set in the end because I thought it was good. I thought what they were going for was cool, but it wasn't interesting enough to fully captivate me for the whole set. But essentially they settled on one like very heavy, like kind of like mid-paced, bluesy, metal-y riff, and then everyone soloed over the top of that. So you had various bits of percussion, you had like different wind instruments, you had guitar solos and all that kind of stuff going on over the top. But at the core it was just a single groove, and I thought could have used just a little bit more spice for me personally, but still not a bad set whatsoever. The next slot was God, I have no idea how to pronounce this. There's so many band names. I'm just like, how the fuck do you pronounce that? The next slot was Heisa, Nimatres, and Pollyanna Holland Wing. But essentially, because I was so shattered from the last night, this is one of the slots I also missed. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to camp and I'll head out for Hippo Tractor a bit later. I'm just going to have a rest. So I get back to camp, of course, pull out my chair, chilling out in the sun with all my mates about. And I end up falling asleep on the chair and missing Hippo Tractor as well. So we skipped 2 slots here this morning. Then I wake up on my chair and I was like, oh shit, alright, I better go check out some bands. And in the next slot was Odradek, Still, and Let's Swim, Get Swimming. I remember checking out Odradek, but I couldn't remember how they sounded when I actually was at the festival. So I just remember enjoying what they sounded like, essentially. Still sounded just okay, kind of like a, you know, like a very, I don't know, middle of the road sort of like shoegazy band. And Let's Swim, Get Swimming were like a 2-piece math rock band. So my girlfriend went to go check out Still, and I went to go check out Odradek, and I thought Odradek were fucking awesome. Just a straight, like, math rock band from Brazil. Incredibly fucking tight. Like, the drum and bass interplay stood out specifically. The drummer was very, very good. The guitarist made a lot of almost, like, lightning bolt-esque horrible noise over the top, which worked a ton of the time. Really, really good set. Really enjoyed it. However, there was a bit of a curveball during this slot, because as I come out and go to meet my girlfriend, so we both thought that Still were this kind of like ethereal shoegazy type band, but apparently that absolutely was not the case. In fact, they were such a heavy, like gnarly, discordant band that my girlfriend ended up almost having a panic attack and having to leave. So after discovering that, we were like, oh shit, maybe some of the bands we checked out were, you know, the other band with the same name, and we got the wrong one essentially. And I was kind of disappointed I ended up missing Still, because that sounds like it would have absolutely been up my alley. But it's okay, because Odradek was still really good. Next band up was Mole. If you don't know Mole, they're like a black gaze band that are kind of blowing up at the minute, I guess you could say. No, that's not quite fair. I think they've just been on the grind for a while. I guess what I'm trying to say is I was surprised to see them on main stage, because I've seen them play so many tiny venues and so many like tiny stages, even at Arctangent itself. So to see them on the main stage on such a huge stage, I was curious to see how it translate. And I didn't catch a ton of it because I was essentially hanging at the back with my girlfriend, who was like still calming down from what had just happened and trying to avoid heart palpitations. But they sounded really tight. They sounded really cool. A ton of their melodies like really work and cut on that huge stage. I know from times I've seen them before, their stage presence was also really good, so it's kind of unfortunate I couldn't see too much, but still enjoyed the set from a distance. It was decent. The next slot was Astrosaur, El Mono, and Stobzan, and I'm going to be honest, I cannot remember who I saw, which means that I either skipped the set, or I saw someone, didn't think much of it, and dipped. So we'll just move on to the next one, which is Covet versus Tuskar. I went to go see Covet because one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that there are a lot of metal bands playing Arctangent now compared to how they used to be. So I felt like I had to catch at least one of the bigger math rock bands that are playing, so there really weren't many. And Covet definitely seemed like one of the more popular ones too. And I'm really glad I went. It was just a very, very chilled out time. The drummer was like smiling the entire time. They're just a two-piece. It's just like a guitarist and a drummer essentially. And the drummer was like, he had a huge smile on him the whole time. He seemed like the most chill, like hippie-looking dude I think I've seen in my entire life. They were incredibly tight, super fun. They had like a couple, in quotation marks, respectful pits, whatever that means. I wasn't quite far up enough to see, but I heard reports afterwards. It sounded like a lot of fun. So yeah, that was just like a lovely little evening sorbet in between all of the heavy bands I'd seen in the morning. And then the next slot was another kind of bizarre one. So as we were checking out bands, one of the big discoveries we had was this band called God Alone. We checked out one song and it really reminded me of almost like an early Battles, I think is like a good comparison point. It's that kind of like very fun, groovy math rock with, you know, just like none of it's like particularly intense or anything like that. It's very much focused on like the grooves and the rhythms, right? And when we went to see them, again, I don't know whether this is Bixler that did it, but they just came across so much more noisy and aggressive than I expected. It was kind of like mind-blowing, honestly. It was so weird because like they had some like unbelievably fat breakdowns in between all of the groovy mathness, and the whole thing was like way noisier than expected, but I had a super fun time. It was honestly like one of the more empty tents I saw all weekend, but I guess that's probably because they were clashing with Slow Crush, who were like kind of doing real good right now. But that was like an incredibly surprising set for the weekend. I did not expect them to be quite as like shouty and aggressive as they were. Also, they came out with the most brilliant comment, which is this song's about karate. Oh wait, no, basically the whole set's about karate, but this one's about karate specifically, or something like that, which just cracked me the fuck up. But yeah, super tight band, great performance, tons of energy, way heavier than expected, a lot of fun. The next set I saw was one that I was quite excited for, and honestly one of the bigger disappointments all weekend. So we checked out this band beforehand called Oranzi Pazuzu, and from what I understand, they're like a very psychedelic, very odd avant-garde like black metal band, and the song I checked out definitely reaffirmed all of that. However, when I saw them live, something about the way the electronics were blending with the black metal elements just did not work at all, and I really heavily bounced off it. So I checked out like two songs, which to be fair was like a long time. It's like a solid 15-20 minutes. All their songs are like very, very long. And I just wasn't quite vibing with it, so I was like, I'm going to just go chill out for a bit, because we've got a lot of bands I'm interested in seeing after this point. So I bailed, had a chat with a friend who's like very into them, and he said the set improved, and he also thought the opening was a bit odd and something wasn't quite right. I guess it's possible it was just like weaker sound, maybe, thinking about it, but that was kind of whatever, a bit unfortunate. I'll definitely give their records a listen and maybe go check them out again, we'll see. But the next set was one I was quite excited about because it's essentially, so the band that was up next was, they're called Bruit, or Brut, I'm not sure how you pronounce it exactly, it's B-R-U-I-T, they're a French post-rock band, and the album they put out is one of the best post-rock albums I've heard in what feels like quite a while. It is very Godspeed worshipy, but I just think they're very, very good at writing melodies and kind of writing twists and turns into their songs that other bands aren't really doing. But when I saw them live, unfortunately, that was a bit of a disaster. I don't know what happened exactly, but they were supposed to come on at 6:55, and at not 6:55, at 4:45, and at 5:20 they were still sound checking. I have no idea what happened, but essentially they started with 15 minutes left and they ran over 10 minutes to play. Instead of a 45-minute set, they essentially played like a 25-minute set. So that was like unbelievably unfortunate. What they played sounded amazing. They were very tight. I really like their brand of post-rock. I think the sound was actually like very solid once they actually started. I don't know what caused them to sound check for so long. I don't know who kind of like who messed up, whether it was on the band's end, they were too picky about sound, whether it was on the sound engineer's end, or whether it was just a kind of equipment failure, like maybe some of the stuff they had didn't quite match up with some of the stuff that the festival had. I have no idea. But unfortunately, that was the reality of the situation. I still thought what they played was great. It just really sucks, and I felt very bad for them. But hey, that's just how it goes sometimes. The next slot was Caspian Arab. I thought Arab sounded kind of cool, so I checked them out. Honestly, didn't find it that interesting. They kind of have this like alt-rock, goth-rock thing going on, but I didn't find it particularly captivating. It's definitely unique. Like, it's a unique blend of sounds. So if you're into that kind of like... It almost has like a country rock aesthetic, but it's still very like noisy and dirty. But it's still very, very like catchy and punchy, I suppose. If that sounds kind of like your thing with like a goth tinge, then definitely check them out. They're very unique, but honestly, really not for me. The next slot was Jamie Lenman, Rivers of Nile, and Straight Girl. I caught a bit of Jamie Lenman and a bit of Straight Girl. Jamie Lenman is an artist that I enjoy one particular era of, and that's the Muscle Memory era. I don't like Ruben, and I don't really like his last two things. I really like him. I've seen him live before, and I've seen him be great before. I like it when he does covers, and I even like it when he plays the occasional Ruben song. But I stuck around for like 3 songs, didn't recognise any of them. Then he essentially said, we're going to play some more new stuff, we're going to play some old stuff, and then we're going to continue playing new stuff, which signaled to me there's like 1 or 2 old tunes he's going to play. I might even not know them because they might be Ruben songs, so I'm going to go check out something else. It's fine. Seemed like he was good. Seemed like people were having a fun time. For me, with Jamie Lennon, I have to enjoy the songs, otherwise I'm probably not going to enjoy the set, so I bailed. I caught a bit of Straight Girl, who was kind of this like unbelievably hyped like electronic set with almost like shouted vocals over the top of it. It was a fun time. She had a ton of energy on stage. I didn't really stick around to give like full comments on it, but definitely seemed like she was having a good time. Seemed like the audience at Quarter enjoyed it too. So yeah, after that I wandered over to the main stage to catch Mono. So Mono are an interesting band because I actually think they're a very, very good post-rock band. Maybe one of the best of all time. But I do find them massively hit and miss in terms of on record and live as well. I've seen them twice before, both at Arctangent. One of them was this incredible apocalyptic, larger-than-life, like just incredibly cinematic set that was like, there was torrential rain and it was the only time I actually didn't care because it fit the tone perfectly. And then the other time I saw them, they played all their quiet material. It was very like, subtle and nice, and it just was not the vibe I wanted at the time. I also honestly think that side of their sound is like a little bit dull. So this time I was really hoping that we'd get more of the like larger stuff, especially considering they'd been put on main stage. And we ended up getting a sort of 50-50, something smack in the middle of both those two. So they opened with these huge post-rock epics that they're really known for. Then the middle kind of like, wandered and wavered a little bit with some of the slower stuff. It didn't get like ultra boring or anything, but it definitely started to head in that direction. And then they closed it off with a post-rock song that was so loud that all the stage equipment was like clipping, and it sounded kind of horrible, but at the same time, it honestly almost added to the atmosphere they were going for. So I thought the set was okay in the end, just a bit of a mixed bag, really. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that. It was it was interesting. I'll definitely want to catch them again, especially when they come around on like a really, really good album cycle, which will inevitably happen at some point. So yeah, interesting band. Need to catch them at their own show. Thought the show was decent. It was like, solidly between the other 2 performances I'd seen, so that was cool. Then the next slot was one of the most heartbreaking clashes all weekend. Leonardo, I think, are a very good band. I quite enjoy them. Also, they'd be a lot of fun at festival because they just can whip out bangers like no other. Scalping are like an electronic, like post-industrial artist with a lot of kind of like very colourful sounds. They're almost like a kind of like a little bit like Perturbator, I guess, at least within the context of this weekend. They sound very different to Perturbator, but they're another kind of like electronic-y banger set you'll be dancing to. And Paranoid Void, which are like a 3-piece math rock band from Japan with a very, very unique sound that I'd only just discovered this weekend, and I was actually very excited to hopefully catch a bit of them. But when I found out they were clashing in this slot, I was like, I'm probably going to want to go see Scalping. I went and saw Scalping. They were fucking awesome. They had this massive projector, like with loads of weird visual art that just fit the tone of everything. Ultra, ultra colourful. The set did not stop the entire time. It was more or less like a DJ set, but played from an actual band. Every song bled into each other. Every groove led into the next one. it was just a fucking banger of a set. The tent was relatively full, not like massively. I imagine a lot of people would have gone to see Leonardo in this slot. But the sound was just fucking awesome. The like heaviness of the bass in a lot of their music can only really come across when it's something incredibly loud. And fortunately it was, because the bass definitely hit different. It was fucking awesome. Everyone in the tent was having a great time just grooving. So yeah, real like highlight for the weekend as well. Especially after this day was a bit of a weaker day, to be honest. Especially again coming off the hype that was Thursday. So Scalping was a really, really solid set to kind of like, you know, come to the close with. Then the final acts for this day was Tesseract as the headliner, who I genuinely could not care even slightly about if I tried, and Palm Reader, a band that I've been following also since the absolute inception, and can't believe how far they've come to some extent. The tent for them was actually pretty fucking rammed. They're right off the back of their album Sleepless, which is an incredible album, and the set was basically very good, but the sound on this stage, Jesus, they got fucked from the sound, to be honest. I was like bang in the middle of the tent. Bear in mind, it's the smallest tent in the entire festival. The speakers should be loud enough to fill it, and you could almost barely hear certain parts of the set when it got quiet for the first like 3 songs. I have no idea why it was so quiet, but it was incredibly quiet. None of the like heavy or punchy bits like hit in the way they should have done. It was just very quiet. The performance was solid. The performance was like tight and enjoyable the whole time. They had a bunch of like session musicians in to cover the like more nuanced parts of the new album. But yeah, when it's not loud enough, it's just not loud enough. After that, they cranked up, and it was definitely an improvement, but it still sounded tinny. One thing I did really like about the set, though, is that they essentially played songs from various eras. So they played a decent amount from Sleepless, they played a decent amount from Braille, which is the album before it, and they played a couple tunes even from the one before that, which is the era that I know they kind of like want to move forward from a little bit, because they've changed their sound between those. They used to be a more scrappy kind of hardcore or mathcore type band. They've moved more into the kind of like soundscapier side of it. Like there's a bit more sludge metal influence. There's just more soundscape stuff in general. But it definitely has its own vibe. If you haven't listened to Palm Reader, I'd definitely recommend the latest 2 records. They are very unique for sure. But unfortunately, the sound kind of fucked them on this one, even though the performance was actually like great. Having said that, though, it did seem like the crowd didn't give a shit, because everybody seems to be loving it and nobody really left or anything like that, which was wonderful to see. And then halfway through the final song of the entire set, all of a sudden, the bass kicks in. It's like, we can actually feel and hear the bass now. What the fuck is going on? No, I have no idea what happened. Must have just been some like sound disaster. It sounded like the bass was essentially only playing out of the cab the entire time, and only just got plugged into the PA. That's kind of what the difference was like. No idea why, but whatever. Shit happens. It was still a very, very good set. So that leads us on to the final day. I don't really have a ton to say about the Silent Disco on the Friday, to be honest. It was just, you know, more bangers, as you'd expect. 1 second. So I've got my lanyard here, which has got all the sets on it. Oh, Jesus. Okay, Saturday's laid out really weirdly. Okay, that's fine. I can work with this anyway. So once again, I wake up nice and early to go catch some bands. This time I was determined to get some food before I actually go see bands, so I ended up queuing outside a burrito stand for God knows how long. And I was I was listening to Deadbird while I was there, who are this kind of like, they're more or less just like a straight up screamer band. They're decent, nothing incredible. Caught like half of their set sonically, thought it was good. Nothing really to say beyond that point. Then I got my burrito, demolished it, because I was actually beyond hungry at this point. And then I went to go see Stanley, who are a really small kind of like quite ethereal like math rock band, I guess. There's a lot of almost what feels like, I don't know what the genre would be. I almost want to say like Baroque or folk pop. But there's definitely a lot of influence from that side of music. I almost feel like the vocalist sounds a lot like Julia Holter when she's doing a lot of the more wispy kind of like high-pitched, almost like fairy tale style vocals, I guess you could say. But I thought they were really, really good. They were a lovely little break from, again, all of the heavier stuff that I was watching all weekend. And Lord knows I needed them in this day, because, spoiler alert, this was about to be one fucking hell of a heavy day. So they were just a wonderful little band. Super tight performance, decent amount of variety throughout the set. I'm very excited to go check them out after this point. Thought they were really good. Next band was Respire. So Respire are a screamo band with post-rock influences, and they have a violin, a violinist in the band to help really like accentuate some of the melodies and that kind of thing. When I went to see them, their violinist was missing. I had no clue what was going on. They spoke halfway through their set, basically saying they've had the last 72 hours have been like an absolute nightmare. They had a session drummer, and despite all of that, they were still fucking awesome. Really, really solid performance. Also, I always thought they were a UK band. I don't know why. They've put out a decent number of records and I've never seen them, which is already quite sus. But for some reason, I think just because their latest record got put out on Church Road Records, I for some reason I just assumed they're a UK band. Nope. First time in the UK. They're a Canadian band. They had to travel over here to play at like 12 in the morning. And they fucking smashed it. They were really, really awesome. Super fucking tight. You could tell they've been a band for a long time because they just, were incredibly professional about everything, about all of the like unfortunate bits that had happened, I guess. They were super passionate about their music. By the end of it, they were all in just dripping messes, basically. They put absolutely everything into all of their music. So hats off to those guys. It's very unfortunate they couldn't have the violinist over, but the set was still incredible regardless. So good job. It was very tight, very punchy, very impactful, very passionate. So yeah, huge fan of Respire. We'll definitely be checking out more of their records from now on. The next slot, I went to go see Ithaca. So Ithaca are a post-hardcore, mathcore, metalcore band. They kind of blend a lot of different types of heavy music, I guess. I've never really been into them, to be honest. I know a lot of people who really, really enjoy them. Never quite done it for me. I don't know what it is. I've seen them live a bunch, and they're like a solid live band. I have a huge amount of respect for what they do, and especially like a lot of the social justice stuff they kind of like push for. I think all of that's like really cool. Especially they're very open about like all of it, essentially. They're very passionate about their music and their politics, so I think that's all really cool. I've never personally got it. I went to go see them. They played incredibly fucking tight. Those riffs, those like dumb fat metalcore riffs hit fucking hard, especially when it's on the Bixler stage for some reason. But just did nothing for me. So I was like, I'm going to go do something else. Good for them. They have a fucking huge crowd. I think it was the biggest crowd I saw at that stage all weekend. So, shout out to Ithaca. You guys keep cracking on with what you're doing. It's pretty banging. So, but unfortunately not for me, I guess. But hey, anyway, the next band, another young, incredibly loud band, Harriet. So this is kind of an odd one for me because I went to Plymouth for university, and when I was there, I pretty much attended like every gig that happened because there really was a lot less live music there than there is in London. So I could more or less just go to everything. It's like maybe one or two things on in a week. And Harriet were a local band to the area at the time. They were essentially a three-piece, very heavy, very sludgy hardcore band that had a ton of like bass in the mix. And in fact, the guitars were almost serving the purpose of what a bass would normally. It was kind of like the roles were flipped. And I thought an EP they put out called the Violence EP was really fucking cool a long, long time ago. But since moving back to London, I'd hear like rumblings about Harriet, and they'd put out I remember they put out a record after Violence, and I was like, yeah, it's just okay, it's not really for me. It kind of went in a more, I don't know, in a bit of a softer direction I wasn't like super into, at least based on like my memory. And then after that point, I didn't hear about them for fucking ages. Then lo and behold, in the last year or so, I kept hearing about this band called Harriet. So I go and look them up because I'm wondering if it's the same band, and I can't find the Violence EP anywhere on their Bandcamp, any representation or proof of its existence anywhere. Also, there's a woman in the band now. There definitely wasn't one before, so I was like, okay, this is probably just a new band. This is just another band with the same name, right? So I go and see Harriet, and they come out with just the most disgusting, like, incredibly assault on the senses style hardcore, almost in the vein of someone like Nails, with tons of like blast beats and ridiculously distorted guitars, incredibly like shrill screams and like guttural growls. And then halfway through their set, they bust out like half of the Violence EP. And I was like, what the fuck? What is going on here? This is the same band that whole time. Why doesn't the Violence EP exist anywhere? I have no idea what's going on with that, but they were fucking awesome. They were so good. Way better than I was expecting, to be honest. It was the first time all weekend I think I had a proper little mosh as well. Because like the crowd were just into it, despite it being like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, hats off to Harriet. They fucking smashed it. Super tight set. The sound on PX3 was again not as good as it could have been. Maybe like a touch muddy, but honestly, it played really well. Almost to the point where it cut through it. And also with a band that's so like blown out and loud, it doesn't matter quite as much for that kind of thing, especially when you're like nearer the front. So yeah, it was just kind of okay in the end in terms of sound, and I mean the set was fucking awesome. So I'm definitely going to be checking out their later material. It sounds great. Yeah, very very excited for that band's future in general. Can't wait to see them at their own show. The next slot was the Hirsch Effect, Sergeant Thunderfoot, and Wavy. If I remember correctly, Wavy actually had to pull out. A lot of bands pulled out over the weekend, and before. I think in total they must have had like 30 or 40 bands pull out since they first put the lineup together, which is incredibly unfortunate. But hey, COVID, Brexit, I guess. That's just the consequence of that. So I went to see Sergeant Thunderfoot, who ended up being this kind of like stoner metal-y band. I just thought they were okay. Really didn't do much for me. I checked out a couple songs, then bailed and recuperated some of my energy from the Harriet set because I was going to see Conjurer after this. And yeah, Conjurer might have been one of the best sets of the weekend. I almost can't believe how well their sound carries over to a main stage. So they've got like 2 albums out. One's called Pathos, one is called Maya. When I first heard Maya, I was not super into it. When I first heard of Conjurer in general, I was not super into them. After seeing them live a long, long time ago, to a much, much smaller room than this stage was, I suddenly flipped and I was like, I totally get it now, this band are really fucking cool. Maya took a while to sink in, but once it did, I was like, the riffs on this absolutely fucking slap. The whole thing is so bleak and oppressive. It's got like a shocking amount of variety on it for like, considering how focused it is on one specific sound. So yeah, I was totally sold. Then Pathos comes out, and I thought Pathos was kind of underwhelming when I first heard it. I was like, okay, they've gone in a more expansive direction, the songs are longer, there's more kind of like posty sections, there's more acoustic guitar. I can appreciate the increased ambition, but I just don't think it's as good. I think Maya, like all the riffs fucking slapped on it, this doesn't have the same energy, not as into it necessarily. Lo and behold, I go see them live at Arctangent, and they play... The majority of the set was actually from Maya. I think they recognised that the expansive stuff wouldn't work quite as well in a festival setting and just bust out the bangers. So they did that, and the entire crowd was into it. The main stage was fucking rammed. There was a huge pit for more or less the entire set. There was a point where the vocalist... this was like chills down spine worthy. It was absolutely insane. But the vocalist walked away from the mic, walked to the middle of the stage. And so the main stage is like pretty fucking big. It's meant to hold like 10,000 people, right? So it's a solid side stage. I was like maybe in the maybe in the dead center of it, maybe like slightly forward of dead center, right? And you can hear his growls absolutely clearly with no mic from the front of the stage to where I was standing and probably even further back. It was absolutely mind-blowing, to be honest. Yeah, they just did a great job of conveying exactly what they were about. They were tight as fuck. The sound was absolutely perfect. All of the riffs absolutely slapped. I don't really know what else to say. It was kind of... I know a lot of people have said it's their favourite performance of the festival, and while it's not exactly my favourite, I can definitely understand why. It was definitely one of the best of the weekend for sure. Absolutely stellar performance. Hats off to Conjurer, man. They were just fucking incredible band going from strength to strength. Can't wait to see what the future holds for them. So then after that, there was Frontiera, Famine, and Cat Bamboo. Cat Bamboo, I think, pulled out as well and ended up being replaced by Sugar Horse. I was less interested in seeing Sugar... Oh, wait, no, it wasn't actually. I don't think that's the case. Because I think Sugar Horse played on a different stage, and that's in Elephant in the Bar again. So, yeah, I guess it must have been someone else that replaced Cat Bamboo. I can't remember, but not important. I went to go see Frontiera, but I only really hung at the back because I'm not massive on Frontiera. I get it, and they're one of those bands where, like, if I listen to a song, I'm like, this is incredibly cool. It's just very disorientating, incredibly heavy. Like, I love all the ridiculous sounding, kind of like... the ridiculous noises they have just like firing off in the mix, like in between the like ridiculous chugs. I mean, honestly, I think that's the word for them. They're just a very silly band in a lot of ways. They're kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, very technically proficient, very tight live, and just honestly overwhelming. I watched it from the back a little bit, and I thought it was good, but after like 15 minutes, I was like, yeah, I kind of get the point. So I'm going to go do something else, which was mostly just chilling out and waiting for the next set to start, which was Castrovalva. So, I don't know if anyone really knows Castrovalva. They're kind of a small band. They're sort of like a wacky, noise-rocky, post-hardcore-y band with like some electronics and a lot of vocal manipulation. It's basically just a bassist and a drummer with a vocalist over the top. And they broke up a long time ago, so it was very like surprising to see them reform to play this. And I've got to be honest, the PX3 stage did them no favours. The sound was fucked. You couldn't hear loads of the electronic effects. The bass was really weak, not that punchy. They weren't like super tight either. You could tell they're definitely taken like a little bit of a break. But they looked like they were having fun, so good for them. I thought it was just kind of underwhelming, honestly, which is very unfortunate, but is what it is. So after that, I went to go see Emma Ruth Rundle, and so I wasn't really aware of what Emma Ruth Rundle was up to lately, but apparently her latest album is basically just like Sad Girl with a piano, so it's incredibly quiet. And this is one of those sets where it was also a little unfortunate that all the stages were quite close together. She was actually fairly far out the way, but you could still, if you were like just outside of the tent, you could still hear a lot of the music coming from other stages. And what was even more unfortunate is you could hear a lot of people talking, because it was a big stage and she had a very, very quiet sound. Luckily enough, we managed to kind of like rustle our way just far enough into the tent that it wasn't as distracting. It was definitely a case of like, this is probably the wrong slot for this particular artist. I don't know what they could have done better, honestly, but I definitely feel like something needed to have changed. She was still really good. I thought she was very captivating. Everything was very very atmospheric, very low-key. And I mean, seeing that directly after something like Frontiera was a bit of a trip. But I did enjoy what I saw. It's just kind of unfortunate, the timing and placing of it, I suppose. So we ended up dipping Emma Ruth Rundle a little bit early to make sure we had good spots for the Armed. Now, this was probably the most heartbreaking clash of the entire festival for me. The Armed are one of the best bands on the planet right now, and they're probably the best live band on the planet right now. But the other band that were playing were Massive the Fermenting Dregs, who are a band that I discovered, I don't even know how long ago, maybe it might have been like 10 years ago, something ridiculous like that. And I didn't know anybody else knew who they were. They were just a weird band I found on an online forum. I have like their first record and I'm a huge fan of it. I checked out some of their other stuff since then. And when they got booked for Arctangent, it was a just jaw-dropping moment because I just didn't realise that anyone else really knew who they were. And they were playing like fairly high up. So despite the fact that I was probably never going to get to see this band again because they were a niche Japanese band that could only really play a festival like Arctangent. They'd never toured the UK as far as I'm aware. Despite all of that, I still had to go see the Armed because I wanted to go see what ripped main stage Armed was like. And I've seen the Armed twice before. One of those times is the best festival set I've ever seen in my entire life, and that was when they played 2000 Trees. And this set obviously probably wasn't going to be as good as that, but I came away with it with some mixed feelings. The performance was fucking stellar. The show and the lights were stellar. They played when they had no issues. They played incredibly tight, and it was incredibly punchy and like impactful. But unfortunately, for the first like 3 songs, the sound was very muddy. They had a shit ton of technical issues to the point where one of the guitarists just threw his guitar into the audience, which I've never seen anything like that. So it's good to see they can still create an environment of utter chaos despite the stage being as big as it was. And yeah, it was just a very mixed bag set. Half of it was like mind-blowing traditional The Armed stuff, and the other half was just like disappointingly muddy and feels like it shouldn't have been on as big a stage as it was. And I think that was really what was so interesting about it. Like, clearly they've done a fantastic job of adapting their sound and show for a bigger stage, but the stage almost unfortunately let them down a bit, and some of the technical issues did too, like the fact that guitars weren't working, the electronics for the entirety of The Witness didn't work, like it just killed certain songs. So it was just a very odd set. I don't regret going to see it. I still thought they were like honestly fantastic, and again, still one of the stronger sets of the weekend. Maybe not the strongest, but still, like very, very good. And also, it's just one of those sets where like I know basically every tune they played, so I had a ton of fun, if for no other reason, just for that. So yeah, the Armed were very, very good, if a bit mixed, unfortunately. But the next band I went to see was definitely interesting because they're math rock legends, noise rock legends, 2-piece Lightning Bolt. Now, I've never been the biggest fan of Lightning Bolt on record. I almost find them a little bit too much. Like, listening to a full Lightning Bolt record is just one hell of a task for me, to be honest. It like takes a lot of energy and motivation, but I can really appreciate what they do. And not only that, they have, again, just a very unique sound. There isn't really anyone else who sounds like Lightning Bolt or do what they do in the exact same way they do. I think the closest thing might be Hella, but even Hella are like less noisy and more focused on the mathy stuff. And watching them do their thing, start to finish for like an hour, was honestly exhausting in the best possible way. They played just really goddamn loud. It was like inescapable if you were in the tent. You felt every single snare hit, and Lord knows there are a lot of them. Every single like bass effect just cut straight into the core of your soul. It was like such a ridiculously high energy, loud and intense, involved set that it was hard to say it was anything other than honestly kind of fantastic as just a pure physical effect, you know. So yeah, they were absolutely great. I will definitely be catching Lightning Bolt again. I understand what people mean when they say they're one of the best live bands on the planet. They're creating something that's very unique, much in the same way to Armin Ra. So yeah, absolutely stellar set. Really, really enjoyed it. Next up was This Will Destroy You. I intended on watching them, but essentially ended up waiting in a queue for pizza for the entirety of the set and heard them off in the distance. They sounded great, that's all I can say. I heard afterwards, one thing that's kind of funny is apparently there was so much smoke on stage that they actually struggled playing certain parts because they rely on visual cues between each other, but they just couldn't see shit between each other, so that's kind of a funny thing. Apparently it didn't affect the set, everyone seemed to think they were pretty fantastic, so I guess it wasn't really a problem. And then the next slot was Leprous, Godflesh, and Miette. I really like Godflesh. I think they're a really good band. I know that's a bit of a hot take, but yeah, they're a really good band. I love a bit of industrial metal, but I was just too fucking shattered. I thought of the prospect of seeing Godflesh right now after the nonsense I'd just gone through with the Armed and Lightning Bolt, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a break before Pupil Slicer. I'm done. There's no way. So I just went and chilled back at camp for like an hour, and then the final slot of the entire weekend was Opeth, Pupil Slicer, and also after Pupil Slicer on the same stage, Her Name is Carla, doing their final show. I've never been a big fan of Opeth, so I really wasn't bothered about them. It was an easy choice for me. Go see Pupil Slicer. New mathcore band, really like noisy, intense, kind of scrappy. Remind me a bit of the Chariot, I guess you could say, but it's still got like a lot of precision to it in the same way that Dillinger would have. That was another stage or another set where I was just absolutely stunned by the number of people that actually showed up for them. They're a really new band. They have one album out and they've gained a ton of traction in that time. They played tight as fuck. The entire place was absolute carnage. Someone kept climbing the one of the like pillars almost up to the roof. The pit was pretty much encompassing the entirety of the inside of the tent, and the only people that were standing and watching were all outside. There was one hell of a dust storm the entire set. They smashed it. Hats off to them. It was one of the best sets of the weekend for sure. To top off an incredible weekend of live music. Almost actually. There's still Her Name is Carla, to be fair. But yeah, very, very good set. It really, really fun riffs the entire time. Kate, the front woman, has like a really unique energy about her. And it works for the band incredibly well. So yeah, no criticisms really. I thought they were awesome. It was another time when that stage was actually like okay on sound. Not incredible maybe, but still okay. So yeah, that was cool. And then the final band that played the weekend for me was Her Name is Carla. They're a kind of like almost like a vocally led post-rock band, I guess you could say. They write almost more traditional songs than most post-rock bands. And this was their final set. I ended up watching half of it because I thought it was good but not incredible. I liked them on record. But honest to God, you could kind of tell they'd been away for a bit. The banter on stage was pretty good. I got to give a special shout out to that. They got a little fuck Opeth chant going on and then kind of like realised, oh shit, what have we done? Let's not talk shit about Opeth. Actually, they seem like nice guys, so whatever. Which was just kind of entertaining and funny to me. But yeah, I mean, it was an odd one because I know I'm pretty sure they'd booked to play their final show at Arctangent 3 years ago, and to have COVID just delay that for this long and then have to get back together, almost having to reunite to play your last show must have been a very odd moment, but they were clearly enjoying themselves. I think the crowd really enjoyed it too. So yeah, that was kind of the end of it. That was the end of Arctangent, and I came home a very satisfied boy. It was incredibly cathartic to get that out of my system, especially considering that the weekend I'd had before at Boomtown was like the polar opposite. So I might do an episode on Boomtown. I'm not 100% sure yet, just to talk about the festival because it's an insane place. But Boomtown is like the most overblown, most intense, most overbearing, overstimulating festival you could possibly attend. And Arctangent is a lot of the times very much the opposite of that. It's focused very much on the music. A lot of the bands that play are quite chill, or at least normally, like all the math rock and the acoustic stuff is all very like vibe-based and relaxed. Even a lot of the post-rock stuff is not like super intense a lot of the time. It's all about the kind of ebbs and flows, right? So this festival was definitely like miles away from Boomtown, and it was very nice for my first festival season back to be two festivals that are about as opposite ends of the spectrum as you could possibly be. So yeah, I had an incredible weekend. As some final notes, I think one thing is that I don't think they were expecting as many people to show up as they were. So the toilets are in a bit of a worse state this year than normal, which is kind of funny, but also gross. And I sort of hope they fix that for next year, but I guess we'll see. I would ideally like a bit less metal. I think it was a bit much this weekend, a little bit overbearing. I think going back to some of the roots of the festival and having like at least one post-rock headliner or kind of like math rock headliner would be really cool. It's almost odd to think that American football headlined this festival when the headliners this year were Cult of Luna, Tesseract, and Opeth. So it's kind of odd thinking back to that. But I do hope that energy returns a bit. Mars Volta are back. I mean, they've always had a Mars Volta channel on the Silent Disco. It's essentially a channel it does what it says on the tin, you know. Plays Mars Volta on shuffle the entire time. So, you know, it feels very appropriate to have the Mars Volta play this festival. And I think that would be a good realignment of kind of, you know, that festival's niche, in my opinion. Because I guess that's ultimately the problem. It's not like I have an issue with metal. In fact, a lot of the metal sets I've said, there were some of my favourites of the weekend. Like I said, Conjure are fucking incredible, to name at least one. But I think it's just, I can get those bands from other festivals. Whereas bands like Covid, bands like Lightning Bolt, bands like The Armed, bands like, you know, even outside of this year, bands like Godspeed You Black Emperor or Jambanai, you're not really going to see those a ton at other festivals. There's a reason why people travel from all over Europe, and even I think a couple of people even came from America and stuff like that to catch this festival. It's because there really isn't anything else like it. So I do hope that next year they scale back a bit of the metal and just, you know, make sure it maintains its kind of unique thumbprint. Having said that, though, one kind of cool thing is that after the festival, I was reading through the official Facebook group, and a lot of people went for the first time to this festival, right? And a lot of them were metalheads, and it was really cool to see a lot of comments that were essentially like, you know, I go to like Damnation every year. I go to like Download and these types of festivals where it's like 90% of the bands play in a metal. And it was really cool that this festival has like such an eclectic taste. I actually found a lot of bands that I really enjoy that are really outside my wheelhouse. I think that shit's incredibly cool. That's like my favourite thing in the world, when people manage to expand their horizons within art, find new things that they love and new things to discover, new worlds to explore. I love that vibe. So I definitely don't want the metal presence to be like completely nullified or anything, but I just feel like maybe a realignment back into maybe just at least I guess like one post-rock or math rock headliner, or kind of one traditionally Arctangent headliner, I think would do a lot of good next year, in my opinion. Like I said, there was definitely a presence to that. The festival, yeah, This Will Destroy You, Mono, Maybe She Will. Even bands like McCluskey, like I said, The Armed, are all definitely like within that wheelhouse, but on the heavier end, I guess. But, you know, it was just maybe like a little tiny bit too much metal this year. So maybe just scale back on it. Those are really all of my thoughts. Like I said, I still had an incredible time. I can't wait to do it all again next year. I can't wait for the hype cycle to begin, and when they announce the headliners, whenever that's going to be. I need to book my tickets, actually. They're doing 20% off at the minute, but only for the first week, which has got to be coming up to the end of now, actually. So, yeah, I should get my tickets booked. But hey, that's everything I've got to say. If you've made it to this point, you're insane. But thank you. Hope you've enjoyed listening, and hopefully I'll see you all around, all right? Peace out, everybody.